heterosexual because
Those kinds of things have been cooking up lately. At least the good stuff, the failed things, you'll have to ask Red Dog about, since she enjoys my failures, and she doesn't write much. Tonight we do have a fantastic guest, and he's a very interesting person, so hold on to your seats. You won't want to miss what he has to say. He's the driving force behind A New Vision of Aging and The Hardiness Factor, as well as the author of a book titled The Shamanic Wisdom of the Recall. Tom Pinkson, see, I got a knot in my tongue tonight. Tom Pinkson has been described by another author as a man who walks the talk. So I've been anticipating this interview eagerly for a long time. So Tom, welcome to the Dawn of Shades.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Well, you said my name, Tom Pinkson, and I'm a transpersonal psychologist. I've been involved with exploring, studying, and working with elders from indigenous spirituality communities around the world for 40 years. And as a psychologist, I've also helped start the second hospice program in the United States, helped Jerry Jampolsky start and worked at the Center for Attitudinal Healing for 32 years with children and adults with life-threatening illness. And now I'm focusing on the program Recognition Rites, RITES, A New Vision of Aging.
Wow. Yeah. The New Vision of Aging, I've recently gotten a taste of things change as you get a little older. I got had an injury to my shoulder, and, there was a time when, you took a crash, and, a few weeks later you're up and running around again, and everything's back to normal.
I remember those days.
No. No, actually, they were lying to you when they said that you had healed up just fine. No. It's gone on vacation, and it comes back. When you get older, and it says, hey, remember me? Remember how much fun it was doing X, Y, and Z? I'm here to stay for a while now.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the saying about how we would have taken better care of ourselves if we'd have realized we were going to live this long, there's a lot of us that are remembering that right now.
Well, the program I've developed and gotten funding for, and it's in process, the Recognition Rites for A New Vision of Aging, is really an attempt to change our attitudes and our understanding about aging, because what I've seen in indigenous cultures is the elders are revered and they're used in a socially integrative way that contributes to the next generation. So both generations benefit from that interaction of understanding the elders have something to share that's important versus our culture's attitudes that are so youth-oriented. When you get past a certain age, then you're not considered to have much worth in the culture. So this program is to not just help individuals make that shift, but also the larger community to begin shifting and understanding its ideas about aging and how they can be the most valuable and powerful times of our lives.
Well, in the last few years, I decided that I had had enough dyeing of my hair, and I let it go to its natural silver color. And people's perception of me has changed immensely because I have gray hair. I must be old.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of amused in some ways about it, because by not following society's norm and continuing to dye my hair, because I'm not even 50 yet, and then I'm suddenly a senior citizen, and you get lots of different kinds of remarks and different kinds of reactions, and it's like we're afraid of growing old.
Well, we are with our emphasis on youth. I think it's part of a larger alienation from nature, because in nature, throughout the history of nature, things are born, things are lived, have their life cycle, and then they die. Go back into the earth to support an alchemical process where in the spring, which we're just starting to have here in California, new life comes forth, but it needs the release of the old for that to happen. That's the natural cycle of life, and we're so alienated from nature within ourselves and nature in the world that it leads to us creating non-sustainable, destructive ways of meeting our needs that have the global warming and social justice problems around the world, economic problems. We've got to shift the paradigms of understanding by how we relate to the natural world and the powers of the natural world, and part of that is beginning to open up to understand how the last cycle of life, what some call the third age, as indigenous cultures that I've been a part of and studying, evidence that can be the most rewarding and enriching time of our lives. But it requires a shift of understanding from doing to being, from doing mode to being mode, and we have trouble with being mode in our culture.
Yeah. We're so concentrated on doing things, and nature is a force to be battled, not something to live in conjunction with.
Yeah, and as soon as we have that perception and that understanding, we're alienated from ourselves, and we're alienated from the field that we're dependent on for our lives.
Yeah. And I think about my family tended to be very matriarchal. My grandmother was the queen, the empress of the universe, and even as a child and a teenager, it didn't bother me to make my parents mad. But the thought of making my grandmother angry would just absolutely freeze me in my tracks.
Yeah.
And this was a woman who never, I think she raised her voice to me once. I was in my 30s and it devastated.
Yeah.
And it turned out that the reason she raised her voice was because of some health problems that were going on that none of us realized yet. Mm-hmm. But, the thing was that even in my 30s, her raising my voice to me just about reduced me to a 2-year-old's tears.
Well, why do you think, that's interesting, why do you think, especially as a child, that you had that kind of, I'm not sure if respect is the right word, but something for her?
Well, it was respect. She was someone who, she knew just about everything, as far as I was concerned. And to this day, I wish I knew all the things that she knew.
Yeah.
I can remember she had a major stroke, and she wasn't even expected to recover from that. And I had just gotten a couple bushels of quince. And for those of you who make jelly, when you make quince jelly, it's done the old-fashioned way because of the high pectin content. You have to know what you're doing because you have to cook this a certain way. It's not following a recipe. It's not that uniform. You have to know, what it looks like when it's been cooked long enough. And if you cook it too long, then you've got jelly you slice. And if you don't cook it long enough, you've got syrup. So there's, a really narrow window of correctness. And I can remember standing there and thinking, oh, good, how am I going to do this? I had to make the jelly because I had the fruit. And if I didn't, my grandmother was going to be mad.
Yeah.
And people, I can still remember because I always, when I spoke to her or called her by name, I said grandmother because it was such a big deal for her to be who she was. And, as a teenager, when working as a waitress and stuff, when I would turn and speak to her, people would look at me so funny because it was regarded as particularly old-fashioned and formal, I guess. And, it was like, no, she's grandmother. Well, you don't mess with the grandmother.
Yeah, so you grew up with the presence of what I would call, it sounds like a wisdom grandmother.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Not that she was always right, but, she was definitely a power source for my entire family.
Mm-hmm. Well, good for you. Good for you that you had that respect.
I have to tell people I was lucky because I grew up with people that had been born in the 1800s as important and contributing parts of my family.
Yeah.
So, there was a lot, I grew up with people that had gone from horse and buggy travel to seeing a man land on the moon. So you saw, they would tell you these stories because storytelling's a big deal.
Yeah, it is.
And, so they would tell you these stories. And it's something that's, I think it's becoming a lost art, this storytelling, this oral tradition.
Well, that's part of why I wrote my book, that you referred to, the Shamanic Wisdom of Huichol. The rest of the title, by the way, is Medicine Teachings for Modern Times. And medicine, in this context, refers to spirituality. So that's...
spirituality is sort of, I think, our next major frontier. It's as though through the years we've addressed the physical world, the scientific world, the industrial world, and we've neglected the spiritual world.
I think that's a primary ingredient, you might say, in the formula that's led to that disaster. We've secularized the world, and indigenous cultures have an understanding, I think somewhat similar, though they use different languaging, to the subatomic physicists, in recognizing that everything has energy, has consciousness, has some kind of awareness and some kind of intelligence. In indigenous cultures, they try to open themselves up. A lot of the ceremonies and rituals to help open up to those, which are ultimately the powers of nature that we're dependent on for our lives, and how to not control them, but how to be in harmony with them. We see what just terribly happened in Chile and Haiti recently, and what the power, how it can be destructive, and we can't control that, but we can learn how to be in better relationship to it. How to ultimately be able to walk in balance in our lives with those powers, those creative powers.
And, I guess my wake-up call to realizing that all things have a form of consciousness. For people who are familiar with the ponderosa pine that grows primarily in the southwestern United States, when you stick your nose in the bark and smell it, it's going to smell like chocolate or vanilla. And one time I had my kids in the forest with me, and we were doing the tree sniffing thing because we all liked it. It was just one of the things that we did all the time. We always sniffed trees. And people thought we were odd, but we did.
Sniffer, that's great.
Yeah, there's tree huggers. We were tree sniffers.
Right, good for you.
And one time there was logging in the area where we were at, but it was a couple hundred yards away was the last place that cut. And this was a place that we stopped often, and when we sniffed the tree, it didn't smell like chocolate or vanilla. It had this slightly fermented, fruity, not quite pleasant aroma. Kind of like fruit that's gone over. And I said, come in here, smell this. And the only conclusion that we had was that the trees, because all of them smelled that way, that the trees somehow knew that a couple hundred yards away, trees had been cut down.
Yeah.
Well, there's only one way they can know and react, is if they have a form of consciousness. If they were just there, they wouldn't have, this was a ways away. It wasn't like they had branches damaged or anything like that.
Yeah.
And they had to have known. Well, how do they know? I don't know how they know. They did.
Actually, it's interesting because as you're speaking about how the trees communicate with one another, and one scientist I remember reading about said that the way they communicate with each other is through pheromones, which of course we can't see in the air.
Right.
But they send out the tree that's being attacked by an insect or whatever. It sends out pheromones, and the wind carries the pheromones to the other trees, and they pick up the receiver, and they react with their capacities to respond as best they can.
So that makes more sense then, because I couldn't figure out how they knew. I didn't know that they did.
But that's an example of the wisdom of the powers of, the invisible powers that create nature that we see and feel and smell and taste and all of that. But it's in those invisible creative powers, there's an intelligence that makes the physical world, makes the cosmos. There's an intelligence embodied in all the manifestations of the creation.
Yeah, and that was, I guess, my experience with realizing, we've all talk to your plants and they grow better and whatnot. We've also heard the explanation, well, they grow better because you're paying attention to them while you're talking to them. This was, a wild tree growing in, the woods, and it had responded to an event in its area in a way I could notice.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how it is for you, but my life experience going into indigenous cultures and going through and learning about their belief systems and through the rituals and ceremonies and initiations that I talk about in my book, then it opens up new windows of perception, new ways of seeing the role we actually play that in creating our experience of reality. And different cultures are like different portholes on a boat, looking at different pieces of scenery and getting different information. Right. So it's so enriching to be able to go into other cultures and have those doorways open.
You had a lot of interest. I didn't get your book completely reread again because it was quite a while ago when I'd read it. And I read a lot of books, so I didn't want to have things confused. But I know that a number of times in your book you're talking about dealing with situations, dealing with grief.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another part of our, I guess, our reaction to grief in the American culture is because death is a bad thing to be held at bay.
Yeah.
and we don't talk about it. We don't deal with it. You know, granted, we've got the mainstream religions and their answers about death, but that's not a very personal relationship with the cycle of life.
Yeah.
You know, it's very impersonal. It's very theoretical. And when you're dealing with grief yourself, it's a much, much different situation. And you talked about those situations in ways that I found very interesting, and I wish that I had read this book about 10 years ago
Well,
when I was in that situation.
I'm glad you read it when you did, and it's among, or another manifestation of our cultural alienation from nature in regards to grief and fearfulness of death. I think we don't really fully step into empowered living of our lives until we faced our death. We've looked into the face of our death and seen the truth that, I don't have forever. This time is limited,
right,
and I'm not in charge of how long I'm going to be here, and so I better get on with my life. I better listen to what's deeper in my heart and my soul that's most important for me, because if I don't live from that place, then my life's not going to be fulfilling. And then when we have an unhealthy experience or understanding of grieving in our culture too, because it's uncomfortable. It's not in the comfort zone. It's not pleasurable. But grief, really, there's an important differentiation between healthy grieving and unhealthy grieving. And unhealthy grieving is denial of it, pushing it down, judgments like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, or putting time limits on it. Those are we shouldn't cry, or we shouldn't fall apart, or whatever the judgments might be. That's unhealthy grieving, because my experience is that grief that's honored resolves. Grief that's honored resolves over time, and it's possible for the person to come out the other side of the experience even stronger in terms of living from their soul, their essence, and what really has value for them than before. But they have to go through the honoring of the grief, and what I mean by that is making an agreement with yourself inside that whatever comes up inside of me, whatever thoughts or feelings or ideas, whatever comes up, I need to make a safe container where those feelings can be felt and expressed and released, and thereby released. And that's what I mean by honored. A safe container where if it's yelling or crying or breaking things or jumping up and down or whatever it is, that you create a safe container so that which is within can be expressed in a responsible way, and as long and as often as it needs to happen. And when all of those feelings about the death of the person who's gone have been honored in that way, it doesn't return the person, and they're still lost. But the person's be able to go on with their life. They're going to be able to go, and perhaps in a more powerful way, because the grief is resolved. But it takes understanding a differentiation between healthy grieving and unhealthy grieving to be able to do that work, and it's vitally important to life.
My own personal experience with making that transition to healthy grieving from unhealthy was I had a son that died when he was 10.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And this was some months after he had died. There again, my grandmother appeared in a dream. She didn't look like she did when I was an adult. She looked like she had when I was a teenager. And in the dream, there was a big family get-together. We were having a big picnic, barbecue sort of thing going on. And I fixed a plate of food for my son, and he came and got it, and he went away. And I remember looking at him and thinking, my God, he's decomposing. And my grandmother looked at me, and she died a year before he had. And she says, you've got to quit doing that, or he's going to keep rotting. And I woke up from that dream, and it was like, that's a really, really weird dream.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it was telling me that it was time to let him go. Mm-hmm. That I was not dealing with it well, and that you really needed to move on past that intense grieving period into a different phase. That I had to let him go and look at life without him.
Yeah. Well, that's a vital and, of course, tremendously difficult and challenging thing to do. I had to start doing that grief work at a young age, just before I was my 4th birthday when my dad died. So it was an early introduction into death and loss, and then grief. And of course, at the time, for maybe almost 15 years, I did unhealthy grieving because there wasn't a safe space of understanding made for and allowed where I could express my feelings, where they could come out. So it all got repressed, and it ended up with life-threatening illness. And then as a teenager, all that energy that had imploded, causing the life-threatening illness of really severe asthma, exploded with the testosterone of a 13-year-old boy acting out his grief. And so when we're not dealing with it, it doesn't go away. It really extracts a terrible price.
Yeah, and you know, maybe I had lacked practice because everybody in my family seemed to be practically immortal. We didn't have deaths. And then it was like for about 2 years, we had one after another, you know, and my son was about in the middle. And so there was, you know, all of a sudden all this death that I'd never had to deal with before. And, you know, and I have to admit, like when my son died, my daughter, I couldn't help her with the grieving process. I had to deal with my own.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't have energy left over. So she was kind of left on her own to deal with it.
There's another little book I wrote a number of years ago, maybe 25 years ago, that came out of the work of the Center for Attitudinal Healing, working with children and families with life-threatening illness. It's called Do They Celebrate Christmas in Heaven?, which is what an 8-year-old boy asked me actually the day before he died, and it was before Christmas. And the other part of the title is Spiritual Rite of Passage Teachings from Children with Life-Threatening Illness. And it talks, it's storytelling, it's the oral tradition of teachings, of going through experiences with young children and teenagers and young adults into their dying that opened a doorway, you might say, that brought through tremendous spiritual teachings and healings also. At the same time, the tragedy was occurring as the loss of a child. Both were taking place, and as if one was an opening, as I say, a doorway for something to come from the world of spirit into this world, reminding us about the fragility and of life and the beauty of life, and that everything's transitory, and really, honor the life that's here. Honor the life that's here, because we don't have forever. And blessings on your son. I'm sorry to hear about your son, but blessings to him in the spirit world.
Yeah, well, and it was sort of a wake up to you cannot predict life at all.
Yeah.
In reality, he was my healthy child. Mm-hmm. My daughter had continual complications with diabetes, and actually I just had gotten her out of intensive care the day before.
Really?
And so, his death was so unexpected that, I really, because if anybody had said, if you're going to lose one of these children, which one would, are you most inclined to think would happen to? And it was my daughter, because the continual battles with her diabetes and being a teenager with diabetes has its own set of issues.
Yeah. Because
the insulin and the sugar and the diet restrictions and the exercise issues and all that becomes a whole new battlefront. Especially since as a teenager, we all know, as teenagers, we were immortal.
Yeah.
And so, she didn't see the long-term ramifications of some of the crap she pulled, And so we did a lot of battling over that. But, I have to admit, when her brother died, she turned 18 just a couple weeks after that. And as I joke with her now, she started to become human. Because she had been, she was a tough kid.
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask what happened with your son?
Oh, he died in his sleep unexpectedly. It was one of those things that even after the autopsy, we really didn't have any answers.
Oh.
There was a possibility that it was an autoimmune issue, and I could have requested a special test be done, and it would have been genetic. So I had asked all my relatives, do you want me to ask for this? Because obviously it doesn't matter to me now, but you could find out whether or not you needed to have your kids tested. And since there's no treatment or cure or anything else, just the knowledge that sooner or later this child will suddenly die with no explanation.
Yeah.
They universally all said, no, we don't want to know.
Well, let me ask you a question, and you could give me some feedback, and maybe be helpful to listeners too, and see if this experience I've had is true or not within your experience. And that is, personally as well as professionally in my work, I see that when someone dies, and the closer we are to that person, of course you can't get any closer than the mother and her child. When a person dies, there's an energy cord from our solar plexus to that other person, and that's severed, kind of like what happens at the other end of the life cycle when they're born, and the umbilical cord's cut. But when there's death, that the cord is cut, but before it's cut, it's really pulled until almost like it breaks away. Not actually, that's what happens. It breaks away. The cord just pulls, and so we have for a period of time like this gaping wound hole in our solar plexus where the loved one is pulled away, where the cord has been broken.
I would have described it as more center of the chest.
Well, that's in terms perhaps of the feelings, but let me just go ahead and finish this thought to check it out and see what your experience was, if I may, which is for that being, that energy to leave, through the surrendering process, there's an opening there, right? There's an opening.
Uh-huh.
And while something's leaving, at the same time, from the other world, from the spirit world, my experience is something comes into the person, and in essence, it impregnates the person with some new possibility in their life, something that wants to be born in their life, that needs to be tended, needs to be nurtured. There's no guarantee it'll be born, but something comes in there that wants to be born, that's going to be meaningful, create more meaning in our lives. And I've seen that over and over and over the years again, and I'm wondering if you look back on your experience, having survived all the horror of it initially, and the shock and the grief and everything, do you see any way that
Yeah, but I would say it was like I had a gaping hole in the center of my being.
Yeah.
And it took a long time.
Yeah.
Not weeks or days or months even. Probably a couple of years.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And as you move past it, because I have some new things in my life now that really are important to me, some projects I'm working on and things like that. And would I have been able to focus on them in the same way? No. It enables me to do a lot of growing as a person, as a spiritual entity, and everything else. In a way that I probably could not have.
Yeah. What do you?
It's strange to explain, I guess.
No, I understand that, and just to keep going with that, as you look back on your son's 10 years, what were the qualities of being that really defined him? That really?
Oh boy! And I've said this a million times. I learned more from being his mother than he ever learned from me as my son.
Yeah.
I learned more about what love is, about dying, about letting go, about living in the moment, about how important our emotions are.
Yeah.
That, because I was always, a very contained person. Very few people knew how I felt about very many things. I mean, you had your public facade, and in display of emotions in public was always something that was just not done,
Yeah.
And so with him, it was entirely different. I mean, he was just wide open all the time, and he took everything in a literal way. And, everything you thought or said or people thought and said to him, he took it absolutely literally. And so it made me look at the world in a different way. Like, the old thing about hanging the Christmas tree upside down. He did the same thing.
Yeah. Now, your son? It sounds like your son was an old soul.
Well, I've often said he was my borrowed child.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what it was like. It was like I had him on loan, and not for all that long, but that was good. And you had a story in your book about, I forget the exact wording, but it was about a child who had said that, we come here to learn a lesson or do a deed, and some of us stay a long time and some of us don't.
Yeah, he said we all have assignments, and when we finish our assignments, we graduate. And of course, those of us here on the human end of it, we wish you'd had longer assignments, but in the mystery of it all. But it sounds like in terms of your son, he really came through as a teacher, and as you said, and really taught you the most important lessons about life, really, which is letting go, that love, the importance of love, living in the moment, and the importance of giving ourselves permission to feel all of our feelings, because that's where the richness of life comes from. So it sounds like your son.
I learned a lot about being empathetic with others. I learned a lot about, just not taking things for granted.
Yeah.
You might not have a tomorrow or next week or next year.
Well, as I say, I'm sorry you lost your son at such a young age, but it sounds like the teachings he gave you have served you in your life, and through how you've chosen to live your life in your radio show, you're sharing the teachings really of your son out to other people.
Well, yeah, and I find it, I think back to actually the worst times after he had died, and you're in the depths of despair, and life is just awful, and you think, I just can't do this. Yeah. And maybe my son and I had a closer bond than average. Maybe not. I don't know. But I would think, oh my God, what if I met him in the afterlife and I had to explain that I wasn't the person he thought I was? Because in his opinion, I knew everything and I could do everything.
Yeah. I think you're going to be all right.
That's a goal to live up to.
Yeah.
Be the person he thought I was.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting, in a way, that while the bodies change, and through death, through physical death, the love doesn't die. The love continues.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Without a doubt. That isn't something that goes away.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that either.
Well, I think that's really the essence of who we are, is that love. I think that's the essence of who we are, and we're here. The purpose of that love is forgiving, both literally forgiving to ourselves, for others, and the act of forgiveness when that's what's needed. I have a friend who mentions, he says sometimes, in the game of love, in the game of life, the one who loves the most wins.
Yeah, it's not he who dies with the most toys.
Right, that's for sure.
Yeah. And I watch a lot of people. Actually, you can go to any mall, and you can sit and you can watch people, especially like at Christmas time. You watch them scurrying around. And you can just sit and watch for 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever. And you're thinking, my God, it looks like a bunch of ants. Yeah. It's so mindless looking. Scurry around, get your packages. It looks a lot like ants carrying bits of whatever back up there.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, there's got to be more than this.
Yep. Yeah, sitting, having sat bedside with many people over the 40 years that I've been involved, that nobody at the end is the currency, so to speak, of material possessions and accomplishment and degrees you've earned, or this, that, and the other thing. That currency is not worth anything. The only currency that's worth anything is love, which is the essence of spirituality.
Yeah, and all we need is love. Well, that's true. And I mean, we need our basic things too: food, shelter, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But once we've got the basics, then we really only need enough. We don't need a McMansion and the biggest Hummer on the block. We don't need those things. That's not enough. That's kind of like overkill.
Yeah.
If you've got enough and you can focus on your spiritual side, life will be much, much simpler. Well, the spiritual side, to me, that's the essence of our being. That's who we are. Underneath, if you peel away the levels, the layers of epidermis, of personality, of ego identity,
and the dramas of our life history. You just keep peeling that away like an onion. What you get to is a place at the center of our being, of light, of unconditional love, of inner peace, of deep wisdom that transcends the ego and even the rational mind. I mean, there's all these, at the essence of our being, its spirit is a gold mine, metaphorical gold mine. But we need to learn how to, in ways that are meaningful to us, to be able to tap those resources that were given by grace.
Yes, and how does the average person really become more in tune with the spiritual side? You know, I watch a lot of people really, really struggling.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're not able to find that. They may go from one church to another, one ideology to another, and you can tell they're searching for something, and they're obviously not finding it.
Yeah.
You know, why not? Where is it?
Well, there's a model that goes back thousands of years of indigenous spirituality, and includes Moses going up on Mount Sinai for the period of time he was there, and of Jesus going into the desert for the 40 days, and that's the trans-temporal and transcultural quest for vision, or initiatory rite, going out into a wilderness area, the desert, the mountain, the forest, and being alone, fasting in solitude in nature. And the whole vision quest experience in indigenous cultures would usually take place as a rite of passage, initiation from being a child into young adulthood, stepping over into boyhood to manhood, girlhood into womanhood. And the understanding is that you're not here by accident. You're not here by accident. You're here by the creative powers of the universe, whatever you want to call them, has given you this life, and it's not by accident. You're a sacred, worthy being. You come from that source, and you have a purpose in being here. And if you're going to find fulfillment in life, it's going to come from discovering what that purpose is, and then living your life in accordance with it, so that when your death does come, you'll be able to look back in your life and feel good about, I lived my life and with integrity, trying to do the best I could to honor my deepest values, not the shoulds of culture or someone else, but the deepest values of that person's spirit, essence, and their soul. And so they send the indigenous cultures, when the young person is ready to step into the responsibility for the exploration to find out why they're here, they're not told that by someone else. They go through training with an elder in the group, and then they go out into the wilderness for a period of time to fast and pray and seek for that deeper vision. And they might be there. I've been taking people on Vision Quest for, I think, 37 years now, up in the Sierra, and of course going through it myself each year. And you have to face all your fears, your anxiety, literally the darkness. You're hungry, you're cold, you're frightened, you're this, that, and the other thing. But if you pass those tests, the indigenous elders say, Spirit's going to test you, and if you pass them, then it's going to give you in some way, maybe through a dream, maybe through something coming from the spirit world in some way, an animal or whatever, that's going to help you understand and see what your purpose is, why you're here, that you're not here by accident. And so the start of trying to really step into more mature spirituality is through an I-thou relationship with the powers of creation, without a middleman or in between. It takes place in nature, and it's by practicing patience, humility, opening yourself, your mind, your body, your spirit, your feelings. You talked about the importance of feeling, to the different ways that spirit might speak to that person in relationship to what they're seeking. What's the purpose of life? Why am I here? I think those time-honored ways, especially in terms of initiation for young people, but it's appropriate at any time in our lives when we feel lost, when we feel confused, when we feel frightened, to find someone who's doing Vision Quest work in the area that you live, and that they're reputable and responsible and conscientious and skillful, and to be able to open up to the nature and the invisible powers from which nature comes is a way to open that doorway to spirituality. And my first native teacher told me, he said, Tom, when was the last time you sat on the earth? You lie down on the earth and you put your face down in the earth and you said thanks to that power beneath you, the earth, that's given you food every single day of your life, that gives you shelter, that gives you the clothes that you wear, the house that you live on, that's giving to you every single day of your life. When was the last time you got down and faced it, and from your heart you said, thank you? And the answer was, never. And so that really opened me up. And said, that's the start of real spirituality. Is you go out into nature and you don't ask for something, you give thanks. You give thanks for that earth beneath you and that sky above you and that sun. Where would you be without the sun and the moon and the rain and the stars? Our bodies are made of stardust. We know that scientifically. So that was I think, the meaningful introduction, or one of the meaningful introductions in terms of practical ways to address the question you asked: how does one connect with their spirituality? Giving thanks for the gifts of our lives back to the creative powers that give us those gifts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think back, my son, had ADHD, and the school was really pressuring me to have him put on medication to slow him down, and I really didn't think the medication was quite the answer.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think he, for one thing, was that severe. I mean, it wasn't the case that he continually was doing something, because he could focus on things. And I discovered that if once a week we just went out to the woods, didn't matter what we did, didn't matter who went with us, just went out into the forest, hung out for, a few hours all day, or sometimes the whole weekend, he could focus much better. We conflicted much less because his focus was better, so he wasn't going off on tangents continually, and you have to corral and bring him back to, the point being addressed.
Yeah.
And, life just went much, much smoother. We just needed that connection every week. You'd go a couple weeks sometimes, if things were going pretty good without going out there. But, it wasn't that far for us. It was just, a short drive. And just going out there, it didn't matter what we did. We might go collect piñons. We might go sniff trees. We might go hiking.
Yeah.
Might just have a picnic. You play in the water and come home.
Well, good for you that you were doing that.
No, it was something that I discovered sort of settled him down. And it was probably good for me, too. It was probably a two-way thing, because it settled us both down, where at least I could keep him on track. Well, and it sort of took the edge off of me, too.
Yeah, you're talking about, you're attesting, really, to the healing powers of nature. There's just being in nature is healing, because we're a natural stimuli, natural energy, instead of artificial, that out of balance with the energies inside of our body, and create disharmony in a lot of those energies. There's actually a term, maybe you're familiar with it, in psychology now, of nature deficit disorder, that kids are watching so much, the internet and the video games and this, that, and the other thing, and more time on the couch, so they're not just getting more obese and out of shape, but they're experiencing problems in relationships and not getting, almost you could say, like the vitamins that you were getting, some essential vitamins or amino acids when you're out, and I'm speaking metaphorically, when you're out with your son there, and when you don't get those for a while, your body starts to go through some kind of problematic response, i.e. illness and distress and attention deficit disorder, or whatever.
Well, nature deficit really kind of works, in that context. And, like I said, it's given me many, many memories. I can remember him running down into to the bottom of a canyon, and all along the creek there was hundreds of butterflies gathered. I don't know why. It was warm. The sun was shining on that patch of like gravelly stuff, sandbar, and all these butterflies. And when he ran down there and ran amongst them, thousands of butterflies fly into the sky. And I can still remember him spinning around just in total awe at all these butterflies taking flight at the same time.
Yeah.
That was just one of those things to remember. Or the first time that he saw a flock of wild turkeys running through a clearing, And, you know, his eyes get big, and he's yelling, Jurassic Park, Jurassic Park. Well, that allowed me to see them as raptors for the first time, because I'd never seen them that way. They were just turkeys to me.
Yeah. Where did he grow up? What part of the country?
Arizona, northern Arizona.
You were out, you had access to living, it sounds like, closer to nature there.
Well, yeah, now I live in New Orleans, okay, and you know, the difference between living in the Southwest and going to the Mogollon Rim and living in New Orleans and going to the Honey Island Swamp is like comparing Mars with Venus.
I can imagine, yeah.
You know, it literally, when I first moved here, it was like nature all of a sudden was an alien planet. And there's monsters in the water, too. They're called alligators.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have serpents that are monsters, too, and I have no idea what they're called because I don't know any of them. You know, and going from somebody who knew all of the plants and animals and rocks and everything to someone who knows none of them is kind of like I moved to an alien planet.
Yeah. Well, you have to learn a whole new order of beings, of consciousness, of energy, of spirits.
Yeah, and I've been here going on 7 years now, and so I have learned a lot, and it's not the same when you learn it as you're growing up, and then, you know, it's just part of the day-to-day thing.
Right.
Is when you live in the suburbs and you make these journeys out there and then come back, you know, when you're in your 40s. It's not as easy.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a young adult and, you know, I'd go see my grandparents, I was expected to give my grandfather a report about how much rain, where the rain had been, where there was stuff for the animals to graze, what kinds of stuff were growing, what was in bloom, what wasn't in bloom. And if you didn't know, oh boy, you were going to hear about it for days.
Yeah. Well, so
and he was just expected to know.
That's great. Good for him. Well, it sounds like you were fortunate to have the grandparents you did. I mean, I don't know what, you know, the other dynamics of anything, but just in those regards, you were fortunate.
Oh yeah, you learn to pay attention, and you know, you learn a lot simply from their being. And grandparents are different than your parents too. You know, when we talk about elders being an important part of our life, your parents are in a hurry. Your parents are working jobs. They're worried about money. You're at a different life stage. They got the dynamics of their own relationship with each other, with the world around them. Maybe your parents are divorced or getting a divorce, and then you might have dating issues going on and step-parents and all that going on.
Yeah. But
your grandparents are in a whole other phase. Time's moving slower for them. And yet 20 years ago was, you know, just a week or so ago. But they have time to teach you things, you know, like my great-grandfather. He would teach you things, and it didn't matter if he had to repeat it 200 times. That was fine. He wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. You know, and if it took 27 tries to do it, he was fine with that. Your parents are like, look, I don't have time for you to mess with that right now. Let me do it and, you know, go play.
Well, one of the most special gifts of my life now is being a grandparent and having 3 grandsons, and among my favorite pursuits is to hang out with those kids and just do things with those kids, learn from them, share with them, and hopefully they get something from me that's going to be meaningful and helpful in their lives as they go on. But that's
and besides that, there is nothing more beautiful in the world than when you're showing a child something and you see that light bulb go on.
It is. It's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, wow, you know. Yeah, there's no drug as good as that.
Yeah.
You know, it really isn't.
And it's interesting that I spent yesterday with the recognition rites, the New Vision for Aging that I do. It entails like a couple of months of doing, working with the individual, the honoree, who's going to be, the whole process is going to conclude with a celebratory honoring and recognition of that elder's their life. But the process of a couple of months leading up to that is going through a reflective process to really go back, you might say, fly back over your life and look at both the highs and the lows. And what did you learn from that? What did you get from that? And it's the experience with your son, certainly the terrible part of it, but then there was also these incredible life-affirming and empowering teachings that came out of that. So it helps the person to recognize and kind of gather up the wisdom teachings of their lives, and taking people through that process and seeing how, like yesterday with this couple I was working with, they can light up with the same kind, when they have new insight to their life and a new understanding of a wisdom teaching that they might have that they didn't recognize. Their eyes light up just like a child, and it's so meaningful to see that, and so rewarding to be a part of that process with and maybe that's the child within, whatever age your physical body is.
Yeah, it could be. I've had, my biggest moments of the light coming on in me has been in explaining something to somebody else, be it a child or an adult. Usually it's been a child. Maybe I've just had to explain things to children more often. But as you're explaining it, maybe it's something you understand on an intellectual level, but you don't have a real personal sort of understanding with it. And as you're explaining it, it's like all of a sudden it'll come to life for you as the teacher.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, why didn't I think of this X amount of time ago?
Isn't that great?
Because this makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and teaching, when you teach someone else, you actually learn an immense amount yourself.
Well, the one of the sayings that came out of my mentor, Jerry Jampolsky, who started the Center for Attitudinal Healing. Are you familiar with that program at all?
No, other than I had looked at it on the internet this afternoon.
Okay, well, just real briefly, it doesn't exist as a set physical location anymore, although it did for 32, 33 years that I worked there. It's based on really what Aldous Huxley called the perennial wisdom, and the underlying wisdom of the different religious systems throughout the world. Based, like things like do unto others as you would have them do unto you, said in different languages in different ways, but the basic understanding. And so one of the things Jerry would say is we teach what we need to learn. And so we set up support groups there for children and families with life-threatening illness to help them through that, using these certain principles of how to use our mind to open our awareness to the presence of love and put our energy into that instead of into fear. And he said, so those of us that were here teaching and facilitating groups using those principles, what we called attitudinal healing, he said, we're teaching that because that's what we need to learn. We teach what we need to learn. I think that's a very intriguing idea.
That may very well be true, but you know what? It's time to take a break.
Okay.
So, folks, while we're away from your computer, check out our website, www.exogenynetwork.com, and stay tuned. The Dawn of Shades will return with our guest, Tom Pinkson. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and once again, I would like to remind everyone to visit the website, www.exogenynetwork.com. And you can sign up for the newsletter, wander around, explore it, and let me know what you think of it. There are links there to take you to blogs, Twitter, and Facebook. If you have a question that you wish to have asked, you can email it to me at giascott@gmail.com. I am monitoring the email during the program with Tom Pinkson tonight, and I'm trying real hard not to miss anything. Tom, before we get started, would you please tell everyone where your website is and what they might find available there?
Okay, thanks for asking. The website, my newest website is my name, Tom Pinkson, TOMPINK, P as in Paul, INKSON.NING.com. That's probably, there's two earlier websites, one specifically about the work with the aging and the other about the shamanic work that I've done with the indigenous people and the initiation, the Huichol, shamanic wisdom of the Huichol. The Huichol are people in north-central Mexico who still follow, to a large degree, the ancestral ways of being with spirit that go back thousands of years. And so I went through an 11-year apprenticeship with Huichol shamans. And the book is about that, along with how I try to integrate those teachings into working with people with life-threatening illness here in the United States. So that's the best, probably best website to go to, and there you'll be able to get information about my book that I just mentioned, about the conscious work with the recognition rights for New Vision of Aging, and you'll be able to see some videos that I've made and interviews on a movie about shamanism and all kinds of material about the work I do. So that's the best place to go.
That sounds like a great one. You know, we've talked the first hour, and we really haven't talked about your book specifically much. Why did you decide to write the book?
Well, it came out of being with the Huichols in Mexico and going through these pilgrimages and these initiations that were so meaningful to me, that were opening up insight and understanding of a deeper reality that indigenous people know about because they pay attention to nature. And it's the same reality that the physicists in our culture tell us, and that is how we're all connected. We're all, it's like an invisible, interwoven web of connectivity, which means we're in relationship with each other and with everything else. And what we do to another, what we do to the earth, what we do to others, comes back to us in some way. So having these kind of really numinous spiritual awakening experiences with the Huichols in Mexico, and feeling so grateful for them. There was so much healing for me from grief and wounds from my dad's death and other situations in life. So much healing and understanding and insight that was meaningful that I felt so thankful. It felt like a responsibility. You know, that it's almost like the Spirit was telling me there, you know, we're giving you these understanding, these teachings to be able to, they're not yours, they're not something to possess, but they're something to share with other people, because they're teachings about, such as what you've learned about through the loss of your son, about what's most important in life. And ultimately, it's all about relationship. When I was on Vision Quest 3-4 years ago, maybe the third day of being out fasting and being with, opening up the Spirit, this kind of song, a chant, came through me, and it's really simple. It goes like this: it's all about relationship, the web you weave so fine. It's all about relationship, the love we have to shine. It's all about relationship, the web you weave so fine. It's all about relationship, the love you have to shine. And that's really what it's all about. It's about relationship. And so when we're given another understanding from indigenous culture about right relationship with nature that sustains life instead of destroys it, is to recognize the importance of balance. And so when you receive something, you have to give back. You have a responsibility, you have a debt of responsibility to give some energy back in a meaningful way to those creative powers that give you your life, not just to take, but give thanks. It's like I'm sure your grandma told you, when somebody gives you something, look them in the eye and say thanks. You have to give some energy back, and then there's balance. Mm-hmm. So the balance, for me, of receiving these gifts from the shamans and the shamanic work and experience was, we want you to write this book, which is kind of like a container to be able to pass these stories on, these teachings, these wisdom teachings on through the oral tradition made into the written word through this book. And that's your way of repaying us for the gifts we're giving you. So that was really the impetus to write the book. It wasn't my idea. It came from Spirit.
When you talk about the relationships, though, when my daughter was a teenager, a family friend committed suicide, and unfortunately, she was the one that walked in on it. And that's a very difficult situation for anyone to deal with. He had shot himself, so it was pretty graphic for a teenager. And it was someone that she had respected and considered like an older brother. So she really was having a very, very hard time dealing with this situation. And it wasn't easy for anybody, because it was really pretty emotionally traumatic for everyone.
Yeah.
His family, his friends, everybody. And, trying to explain the situation to her, because statistically I knew that anybody who was in the situation she was in runs a much higher risk of becoming a statistic themselves.
Yeah.
And obviously as a parent you don't want that for your child. And it was very difficult for her to put into perspective, more so than maybe for an adult because of lack of life experience. So the way I explained it to her was, it's like everybody has a life debt. You owe everybody something, simply because you're here and alive at any point. Okay, whether you want to be here or not, you are here. You owe everybody. Anytime you choose to commit suicide, it's like you're reneging all those debts. Nobody gets paid back, and you can't, take that option without reneging on those debts.
Yeah.
And she all looked at me. We've talked about it because it's been over 10 years now since that incident happened, and we've talked about it since. And it was a very difficult time in her life. And she said, that really did kind of make sense. And she says, anytime I get to feeling like I just can't deal with it anymore, she says, I think about that again. And I can't do that to everybody.
Yeah, well, good for you. Good for you, good for her. Good that it came through you and that she was able to receive it.
The whole idea of, life debt, I guess, seems kind of strange to a lot of people. Because when I explain it to other people, they look at me like, I suddenly started speaking Chinese. And I'm like, no, really. I mean, it's like we owe everybody and everything. And we go through our life paying off all these debts. Some of us, it takes longer than others.
Well,
that's the only way to look at it.
That's a very indigenous way of being in life, understanding that we have to, imbalance is created when we just take, and that's why we have a lot of problems that we have today, because we've got an extractive society. We're taking things and we're pulling things and we're using things, but we've forgotten about how to give back gratitude, how to give back thankfulness to those sources, and that's the spiritual understanding, you might say. That's a lot of why we have the problems we do. We're out of balance with giving thanks and gratitude back to those spiritual powers.
It's a lot of times I guess I look on it. It's for me. It's like I visualize it as a bank balance. Like somebody may stop and help me when I'm broke down alongside the road.
Yeah.
And I can't repay them that favor. I can't. I may be in a place I'll never be again. I may not know who it was even that did so. So the only way that I can repay that favor of whatever kindness some stranger has extended towards me is by passing it on. So somebody's going to come along in my life that needs something. Whether it's my expertise, my money, my time, my attention, whatever it is, I can pay it back there. It doesn't have to be to the specific person that gave me the favor.
Well, then you're using that web that I referred to, that invisible web of
that invisible web is very real to me.
Yeah. Well, good for you.
And it is. It's kind of how I regard everything. It's all interconnected. Even though, okay, I really, really, really don't like spiders. Okay, the spider web analogy does work. I've spent a lifetime trying to keep their space and my space separate.
Well, Spider Woman in the territory it sounds like where you were raised in Arizona with the Navajo, she's a central figure for the Navajo, isn't she?
I believe so, but since my own family wasn't Navajo, that didn't even really figure into our, you might say our microculture. I really didn't hear those stories until I was an adult, and my mother is absolutely terrified of spiders. I probably learned that behavior as a child. And it hasn't gone away because I happen to be allergic to spider bites. So, if I get bitten, in the past it's resulted in some nasty. As a teenager, I got bit twice by a recluse spider on the back of the thigh. Anybody who's nursed one of those bites knows how long that took to heal.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Yeah, it was very, very nasty, and I just really, to this day, I don't like spiders. I just always have a sincere hope that and see, here in Louisiana, we have something called the yellow silk spider, and it's huge. It's as big as my hand, spread out. Yeah, and it makes webs like 15 feet across. They look big enough to catch birds. And the first time I saw one, I was actually taking a tour in the swamp. And they point out this spider, and then the guy proceeds to tell us they can jump. I moved to the other end of the boat. You know, they did. It looked big enough to eat birds, and the way the web was spread across the waterway,
yeah,
it did look like it probably caught small birds.
Oh boy, so you must have had an anxiety attack.
Well, I wouldn't say go that far, but maximum space, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. To me, they're just, very alien looking, I guess.
Yeah, spiders can be pretty scary.
Yeah, well, as a child, I was absolutely terrified of crawfish, too. And now I live in the crawfish capital.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. And I have eaten many of them. I've cooked many of them. I've caught many. But would I want to sit and play with a bunch? No. I haven't gotten that far over it. It doesn't bother me to handle them, but am I really thrilled with them? No, they're still pretty scary looking. My mom tells a story, where I scared the dickens out of her with having screaming heebie-jeebies over a 2-inch crawfish. 2 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
In a campground restroom. She was not amused.
I'll pass on that one.
Yeah, it was going to get me. I was sure of it. She was sure at least a bear or an axe murderer was involved in the equation.
Yeah.
So, needless to say, I learned don't scream unless it's extracting blood now.
Yeah. That's a good learning.
Yeah, it's just one of those childhood. I think every child has a fear of something, and it's usually something that has scared them. My daughter did not like crickets for the longest time. Well, I can remember why. Children tend to squat down and get their nose right up to something and look.
Yeah.
She did that with a cricket. A cricket jumped in her face, scared her. And after that, she just didn't like crickets. And, she's not afraid of them. She doesn't carry it as far as I do. She actually had a lizard, I think it was, that ate crickets, and so she had to handle crickets regularly. Some sort of a reptile that ate crickets. But, she really didn't like crickets at all. And it took her a long time to get over that. I've seen people with phobias about moths or whatever.
Yeah. Well, we all have our own fears and anxieties, and I think, like that chant I got on Vision Quest, it's all about relationship. How can we create in terms of a spiritual growth perspective or human potential growth perspective, how can we create a response to our fears that grows us in a positive direction, so our fears aren't contracting us and limiting us in our ability to fully participate in life in a meaningful way. We all have to find ways.
Well, you mentioned a story in your book that sort of combined fear with a physical response when you were talking about I think it was poison oak.
Yeah.
Our bodies do respond to our fear of something.
Yeah, we see that increasingly in science and psychoneuroimmunology, and the research between the brain, the body, and the immune system is showing us this incredibly intimate, vital connection between what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what's taking place in our brain and in our immune systems, in our state of health or disease, and the interrelationship between, again, the web of relationship between everything being connected.
Well, in my case, I had a number of moderately severe allergies. And over time, a few of the really bad ones had gotten better. I was definitely allergic to hops, which sounds like a very innocuous sort of allergy, but it meant that I could not go anywhere that was serving beer, not even an outdoor barbecue, because just fumes alone would start me swelling. Well, it was really kind of a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
And because, drinking beer is something that commonly occurs in American society.
Yeah.
Now, over time, that's gotten better. I would never drink it, but I've actually had it spilled on my skin and nothing happened. Some of the other allergies had not gotten any better, like to citrus and melons and all these other things, and it really meant that anytime I would eat at anyone else's house, it was like playing Russian roulette. We're going to have a reaction or not,
Yeah.
And I guess it's been about 6 months or longer. I had a guest on who did healing by dowsing. which was an intriguing idea. And so he did some of his handiwork on my allergies. They've actually gotten much, much better. And I'm no longer focused on the possibility of a reaction, which I think decreases the likelihood.
Yeah, it does.
Because I really don't have I haven't had a severe reaction. I think I've had hives mild case once since then, which for me is, quite an improvement.
Yeah, there's an interest in the context of what we're talking about is interesting research findings that people with different kinds of severe allergies, when they're in an altered state of consciousness and exposed to the same stimuli that ordinarily would produce the allergic reaction, they don't have any reaction.
What a lot of people don't realize is that you can have a reaction even if you don't know you're being exposed. So it's not purely a psychosomatic thing.
Oh yeah, totally. No, there's a stimuli. There's a stimuli.
And it is interesting that I had read something about that in an altered state of consciousness you didn't have the allergy. And I thought, well, that's quite interesting because a lot of people think the allergies is put on. You just don't like, especially food allergies. You don't like, whatever X is.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. Oh, I love lemons and limes.
Yeah.
I couldn't have them.
Yeah.
People think melons, that's no big deal. Well, it is when you consider the number of things that are a member of the melon family, which includes cucumbers and squash and, all the different kinds of melons and so forth and so on. I couldn't have any of those things.
And still?
No, now I can. I started off, I would eat a 1-inch square of cantaloupe, and nothing happened. And so then the next time it was 2, and nothing happened.
Yeah.
And now I wouldn't think twice about sitting down and eating a piece of melon.
What do you attribute that to, that healing of those allergies?
I really can't answer that other than maybe I'm just more in balance with who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Because the allergies became incredibly severe when I was really sort of lost, I would say. I was really, unbalanced, really disconnected, and really couldn't figure out what was wrong.
Uh-huh.
And, that's when the allergies became very severe.
So
over the last couple of years, I battled this strange rash on my skin. And anything the doctor gave me was like feeding Miracle Grow. It just got worse. So I just quit treating it and just let it be, and it itched a little bit. It wasn't really super uncomfortable. It was mostly disfiguring because you had these blotches, and they were on my arms, they were on my neck, they were sometimes on my face. One thing you could do about it, just blotches. And I've noticed that over the last 6 months, it's just gone away.
So if I'm understanding you right, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that when you're more in balance in your life as an integrated person, then you're more through that balance, you're healthier. There's a higher level of wellness in you.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I've been told by a friend of mine, well, the rash is unresolved anger that you've got inside. And I'm like, you know what? I'm really not angry at anybody. But maybe I was. Sitting now and looking at it in hindsight over the period of time where it's just gone away. Well, I've removed some things from my life, and in that same time period, those things have gone away. And I was kind of like, that's quite interesting.
Well, when we don't pay attention and work with our feelings in a skillful way, where we repress them or deny them or cover them up or project them on somebody else, and it creates a state where there's a wisdom inside the body through those feelings that's trying to get us to pay attention to something. And when we don't, it creates dis-ease, and if dis-ease continues long enough, it manifests what I call, everybody has an Achilles heel from the story of the Trojan War, where Paris was shot in the heel by, Achilles was shot in the heel by the arrow of Paris, and the heel was the only part that hadn't been protected by his goddess mother dipping him into the river, and she held him by the heel, and so that's where he was vulnerable. So we all have, through the genetic inheritance we all have an Achilles heel, and under enough stress, that's where we're going to break down. Some people it might be in the skin, some people it might be, in terms of the heart or the liver or this, that, or the other thing. So you're really hitting on the key that the feedback of the whole system in terms of the experience of wellness is when we're in balance, when we're working and integrating in the different aspects of our being, body, mind, feeling, spirit, relationships. Then when those are in balance, we're feeling good. Our energy's different. Our immune system's stronger. So we know that scientifically now. That web of invisible relationships between our thoughts, our minds, our body, our feelings, and our health and wellness.
Yeah, definitely. And then I start looking at this trend that I've talked with a number of friends. It's like, you know what? Everybody seems to be treating either or both attention deficit disorder and depression. And it's like, we can't all be that depressed. And we can't all have this disorder. Otherwise, it's not a disorder.
Yeah.
It seems to be the order.
Yeah.
I used to tell my kids, too. Both of them had been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And I was like, you know what? Disorder is the wrong word. I, too, shared that little quirk with them. I said, it's not a disorder. There's nothing wrong with the way our brains work.
Yeah.
They just work a little bit differently. And we just have to learn how to work with it.
Yeah, that's true.
And really, I don't find it that difficult to focus on things. Now, if it's a boring task, my mind's going to wander. But, if it's something interesting, I don't have any trouble focusing at all. So what if I jiggle my foot? Jiggling my foot is not a disorder. It's just a bad habit, I guess. And that's kind of the way I just explain it to them.
Yeah.
It's no excuse. Your mind just works differently. Just get on and get on.
Yeah, we have to learn how to work with the systems we're given, whatever their sensitivities are. That's what we learn. That's our challenge, how to work with that skillfully to make our lives work.
After, we were diagnosed and we start looking at our extended family, and it's like, you know what? I think this so-called disorder is more the order of things within our family.
Yeah. Because
the ones who don't exhibit symptoms of it, the rest of us tend to regard as a little slow because they can only do one thing at a time.
Yeah, and it's not I really agree with and support that's an attitudinal healing shift. Instead of holding it as a disorder, shifting the attitude that you held about it from a negative to this is an opportunity to do some growth work. But on a deeper level, it's like what's being called in this case hyperactivity. That's a survival trait in the species. That if we didn't have that, if we weren't able to be hyper alert, 10,000 years ago with the saber-toothed tigers and 20,000 years ago, and this, that, and the other, all the threats, the physical threats to our lives, we wouldn't have survived. Humanity wouldn't have survived.
Yeah, and just because a child doesn't need as many naps as the other children in their age group in this particular location, doesn't mean there's something wrong with them or wrong with the others. They just have different needs.
Yeah. Well, another concept from attitudinal healing is the whole notion of we have a choice in life to be fault finders or to be love finders. Look for the negative, see things in a negative framework, and you're just using seeing it as a disorder as being a fault finder. So we're basically a culture, I think, and I think it has a lot to do with the depression and the deficit disorder. Is we're ourselves. Oh, you know what? I think this phone, the battery on the phone is. Hold on one sec. If it runs out, let me give you another. If you call me on this other number, I think it's going to die out here any minute.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can go to a break real quick here. If the producer is listening.
Wake up.
Yeah.
Let me give you the number real quick so you've got it in case I lose it, okay?
Okay, well, it's going to go out on the air, so you might want to...
So how should we do that?
Can you check your email real quick?
Can I check my email? Let me go
I'll
through
give you a number. You can call me or you send it to me.
Okay. Go ahead.
I will send you an email, and you will have it here in just a few seconds if I lose you.
Okay.
Okay, all I got to do is get to the right page, and hopefully he will get on the ball and go to break.
In the bathroom. Sorry about that. This phone, I'm not sure what.
Sometimes things like that happen.
Karen with me?
I'm still here with you.
Okay.
And we're still live and on the air. He's not heard a word. Yeah, he went off to do whatever.
Yeah, I don't know how to charge the battery while I'm using.
Yeah, well, we will just continue on, and if the phone goes dead, well, we'll reconnect with you. Fresh Age. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and tonight we are talking with Tom Pinkson, and we just had a brief break. So, Tom, we were talking about, the effects of our attitudes and spiritual status and all that kind of good stuff in terms of our health and how it's reflected. As we all age, we are more prone to having health problems.
Yeah.
And most of us have, aged a little in the last year or two. If not, they've got some really good Tupperware, and they need to send me some. But I keep making jokes that, it's too bad that as soon as I start getting it together, my body starts falling apart.
Yeah.
And so we try to maximize our health versus the time that we have to complete our assignment. So how can we do that?
Well, I think what really is one of the most significant dynamics to cross what I call the threshold into aging consciously and skillfully, because one of the biggest challenges we face is, as a friend of mine just put it, 76-year-old friend of mine that I'm working with in the recognition rites, put it, the edifice is crumbling. Physical body can't do the things it used to do in our younger years, and we have aches and pains and this, that, and the other thing. And that, too, is part of a breakdown of the system and the natural rhythm of the aging process. And the more we're identified with our bodies, who we are as our bodies, and what our physical bodies can do when they can't do as much, then we're just one loss after another. Sadness and depression and frustration and sometimes self-pity, and it's just one bleak event after another. So the challenge there is to begin making a shift from thinking in terms of doing mode into being mode, the qualities of being. So as I used to be a mountaineer for many years, and if people read my book, you'll see I was a rock climber and mountaineer, and I use that as a treatment program and working with heroin addicts. My knees don't allow me to climb anymore. I used to be a marathon runner. I had a back injury years ago. I can't run. I hike now, but I can't run. So I had to find ways, first of all, accepting that these consequences of the aging process, accepting it, not being bitter about it, looking deeply at, okay, what were the ways what were the needs I was meeting through those activities, and how can I find other ways of meeting the needs that are still there? But I can't do that creative exploration if I don't accept the loss. And if there's grief and sadness, I need to acknowledge those feelings. But gradually, we need to start shifting in order to have a sense of inner peace, and this grows us spiritually, and that's really the work of the last section of life, is to begin to shift giving value to ourselves in terms of what we do, our activities, and shifting it to the qualities of being, the qualities of soul, of heart, of loving, of caring, of sensitivity, of compassion, of generosity, of wisdom. These are really elements of wisdom, of grace, the healing, transformational power of love. And we can always be, no matter what the state of our body, even just lying in bed, we can always be a source of love, of light, of peace, of healing into the world, because every thought is an energy and it goes into the larger field. And so the shift from doing mode and defining our value and our worth in terms of what we can do, when those potentials start to diminish because of the aging process, we have to cross that bridge of awareness into, okay, now it's about developing the qualities of being. And when we do that and begin to define ourselves in terms of those qualities of being, I'm a loving person, I'm a kind person, I'm a generous person, I'm a creative person, I'm trying to with my thoughts and how I live my life, how I treat everyone, I'm trying to be a part of a healing transformation, contributing my energy to a larger field of people trying to transform what's happening in the world from fear-based destruction and violence to loving kindness and working cooperatively together with the circle of life. So that's really the rich potential of the third age, the shift from thinking and valuing ourselves in terms of doing mode to the being mode. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it made me think about when my grandmother, probably 10 or 15 years before she died, she was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. And she was no longer able to do a lot of the things she'd always done. She was always the one who did all the cooking for, big get-togethers and whatnot. And, she would be, complaining about, I can't do that. And I said, well, grandmother, look at it this way. I said, now's the time that you can teach us how to do it, because if you keep doing it, you're not going to teach us how to do it.
Good
and,
for you.
That's kind of the way I saw it, is she can't do it anymore,
yeah.
but she can still teach us how to do it, and
exactly.
if she could keep doing it, we wouldn't learn.
Yeah, and then you mentioned several times the oral tradition. So in the indigenous cultures, it's that oral tradition by which the elders pass on to the next generation the lessons, the teachings, the learnings that are going to help that generation carry the life forward and sustain it, just like the previous generations have done.
Right, and as we age and we can no longer do, maybe in a natural way of things, when you look at it, it is forcing the person with the knowledge to pass it on to the next generation.
That's our job as elders. That's exactly right. And the cultures that what I call sane recognize that and therefore value their elders. The cultures who've kind of lost their marbles don't no longer value their elders, and so those lessons don't get passed on, and both generations miss out. And that's where we are.
You do.
Pardon?
You really do miss out. I think about all the things that my grandparents knew that they didn't have time enough to teach us, or we didn't have time enough to learn.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dang, I wish I knew how to do X, Y, and Z. Grandmother could do that, but how did she do it?
Yeah.
Some things you can fill in through, books, and you can fill in from other elder relatives that are still alive. But some things are like, she was the only one that knew how to do it.
Yeah, that's another reason why these recognition rites that I'm doing with elders, helping them across that threshold consciously, is that everyone has a story, everyone has wisdom teachings in their lives, and what a shame it is and what a loss it is when that person dies and isn't able to pass that on in some way. And so the recognition rites is a vehicle by which elders can do that, and they invite whoever they want to the culmination night, the recognition rite night, and get to share that with them in some way that's meaningful to the audience.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's very interesting, because that's one thing that our culture has kind of left out, is the rites of passage. In terms of our psyche, we kind of need them as, you might say, signposts.
We absolutely do. They're vital. And when we don't get, when the young people especially, but at any stage of transition, when you don't have a rite of passage, you just got to struggle through it. And the whole idea of the rites of passage is, again, from indigenous cultures. They recognize during these times of transition, it's like the old is dying away and something new is trying to come through, but it needs guidance, it needs nurturance, it needs support, or else it can go in destructive ways. As a young person myself, when I was 13, I with the unresolved grief inside of me, as I mentioned earlier, it came out, my pain and hurt and anger that hadn't been healed because no one knew how to work with me in those days, and many years ago with children's grief. It came out in juvenile delinquency. Now, what was in that juvenile delinquency? It's exactly the dynamics that a sane culture offers its young people as a rite of passage when they're ready to test themselves. So through the juvenile delinquency, we're doing dangerous, adventurous things that we could get into trouble for, and get hurt for, or get arrested for. And underneath that, it's a destructive way of trying to meet a need that needs to be met in a healthy way. Create adventure for the young person that's set out responsibly by the elders who have been through it themselves, so that young person can test themselves responsibly, and through that test get a measure of who they are, their deeper being, and how to connect with their deeper being, their heart, their soul, that they have a purpose in life, they're needed here, and what that purpose is through something like the Vision Quest, which is a rite of passage. And when we don't have that, then it really exacerbates all that's going on in the transition, the anxiety, the fear, and it can turn destructive. A rite of passage, you not only survive through that transition, you not only cope with it, but you come out the other side stronger than when you went into it. So rites of passage are vital to healthy lives of wellness and responsible living with nature and with each other. And when we don't have it, we pay pretty significant dues for it.
Well, I think about, my own experience as a teenager. I don't think the teenage years are easy for anyone, because it is a difficult time.
Yeah.
Your body is suddenly changing. You've got all these raging hormones, and you've got, physical growth. You've got increased expectations from society, increased pressures, and at the same time, you're trying to simultaneously break, this theoretical umbilical cord from your parents to become a independent, unique person.
Yeah.
And it's an agonizing period of life. People who say, I wish I could go back to being 16, I'm thinking, you're out of your ever-loving mind. I don't want to do that again with nothing.
Yeah, it's some of the most difficult years of my life, 14, 15.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's painful. It's awful. Everything is so dramatic. And in addition, American girls, Western girls, are pressured with these very unrealistic expectations of what physical perfection should be, what they should look like, how they should dress, how they should wear their makeup, how they should wear their hair.
Yeah.
And, your rebellion is being expressed in so many different ways. I would say that my teenage years were just marked by incredible anger, at the world, at everything.
Yeah,
just incredible anger.
Yep.
It's like, And it took me a long time to get over that.
What was your anger about in those big years?
Oh, life was not fair.
Yeah, okay. That's the teenage...
life was not fair.
Yeah.
There was nothing fair about it. There was nothing realistic about it. Most of it was just a big fake.
Yeah, my anger was, as a teenager, came from the injustice of, hey, I'm 4 years old, my dad who loves me is suddenly taken away from me. Nobody asked if that was okay. That's not fair. And so it busted all the fairy tale stories, the way they ended, and they lived happily ever after. Well, at 4 years old, that was shattered for me, and so my anger was raging against the injustice. But the other side of that, the positive that came out of it, was it had led me onto a search that took me eventually to indigenous cultures and really brought me the guidance for my life, is what is worth living a life on in the face of death. It could come at any time and take people you love and yourself without your okay. What, if anything, is worth basing a life on? And that's what began my exploration that eventually led to becoming a psychologist and working in healing and exploring other ways of looking at, what's most important in life and how to live it.
Yeah, I guess my anger was more directed towards myself, which was, really self-destructive.
Yeah.
I'm probably lucky that I survived all the shenanigans.
Yeah.
Because, there were substantial injuries incurred on a number of occasions.
Yeah. Because
risks had no meaning.
Right. I think we're...
there again, part of it is, as teenagers, you're immortal.
Right.
You're really not, but you think you are.
Yeah.
Life is going to go on forever. It has always been this way, and it always will be this way. All right, none of this is true, but you don't know that yet. There's a reason why you don't reach adulthood until, 18, 21, right around there. And there is a very good reason. It's because you're probably not going to qualify as a particularly responsible adult before that. There may be exceptions to the rule, but you lack the life experience to base decisions on.
Yeah. Again, the importance of elders to teach us from those experiences.
Right, and, to direct all this energy. As a teenager, our house was filled with poltergeist activity. We had 3 teenagers at the same time. So it really was. I mean, pots and pans would fly across the kitchen. That was nothing unusual. All sorts of strange things would happen in the dead of night. and nobody had been downstairs at all.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of pent-up energy, you might say, flying around, literally. And, you know, the spiritual experiences that I had as a teenager did tone down. I wouldn't say that I completely got it yet, because I didn't. But at least it kind of, you know, was a wake-up call to a degree. Because, you know, I didn't continue on the self-destructive path. Otherwise, I probably would have ended up a drug addict or severely debilitated by injuries or something, you know, really awful. Yeah. And none of those things really happened. But I know that a number of the people that were a part of my life at that time did go on to do those things. Most of them are no longer alive. And, you know, the saying goes there, but for the grace of God, go I. You know, and that's very true.
Yeah, I say that a lot.
Yeah, because I stopped. I went on a different path, and they continued on the same road that I was apparently headed down.
Yeah.
And, you know, was it because of the pressure from my family, you know, is there again the elder influence? Or was it because of something in me, or was it because of my spiritual experiences? Who knows? It was probably a combination.
It was all of those things, yeah.
You know, but I know that they apparently didn't have those influences in their lives. Yeah. And went down a far different road.
Well, those are gifts of grace in our lives. We share that, and again, that ties into one of the things we were talking about earlier, those debts of what's called reciprocity, of being thankful, expressing gratitude for all those gifts of guidance and protection, and really, without them, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, you know, a lot of people look at me and say, oh, you had a very hard life, and I'm thinking, no, actually, I've had a pretty easy life. I don't see anything that I've done as being particularly difficult or challenging. I've had it pretty easy, actually. There've been some tough times, but they were tough times. You know, that old story about everybody in town took their bag of troubles and put it in a big pile in the center of town.
Yeah.
And one guy stands and watches everybody doing it. And all the people that he thought had no woes at all in their life had the biggest bags of woes to put on this thing. And at the end of the story, of course, he took back his own bag because that was, you know, pretty small compared to everybody else's.
I didn't know that story. That's a good story.
Yeah, it is. It's a great story. And, you know, it's very, very true. Our own bag of troubles may seem awfully heavy, but when we really get a look at somebody else's that may not be so apparent as our own, then our own bag doesn't look so overwhelming.
And also, it's you mentioned the hardiness factor work that I do, the personality that's able to be with the stresses of life and not crumble, but keep going, and in some cases get stronger and bring through new creativity, such as you've done in your life, like with this show. But it refers to a lot of the hardiness aspects have to do with attitudes, and you've certainly demonstrated with some significant challenges in your life, attitudes, positive attitudes that have helped you. What you can't change, like neither one of us can change the losses that we experience, but we can, if the relationship we have with those losses are ones that constrict us, close our hearts, shut us down in fear, then there's our lives damaged. But if we can create relationships with those stresses and challenges, which comes down to attitude, how we hold it, how we respond, we create relationships to them that help us grow. Then it's like we turn it's kind of like in gardening, you know, you turn the crap into compost and it helps flowers grow. Take the negative things in our life and create a relationship with them that helps us grow in a positive direction.
I can remember actually, and this was in that brief time period between my son's death and his funeral. And, you know, of course my family's all gathered around, and I remember telling my aunt, I said, I was referring to a person that we all knew who had lost a son and had become very bitter and unpleasant, and essentially alienated everyone that had previously mattered in her life and that had cared about her. Yeah. And I said, you know, if I become like so-and-so, just shoot me. I said, don't let me do that. Yeah. And, you know, they kind of all laughed because I guess it was just a shocking thing to hear me say. Yeah. But it was like all of a sudden, you know, I was wearing her shoes. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to become tight and pinch my feet like they were to her.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe, and talking with people who are emergency preparedness experts and whatnot, they say the same thing. You can have a stockpile of everything under God's green earth, but it will do you no good if you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
It's how you feel and your ability to adapt to changing circumstances.
Yeah, basically what that entails is learning how to use your mind and your spirit, your heart, in a way, working together harmoniously to problem solve creatively the challenges in life. And challenges are always going to be there.
Yeah.
So, good for you.
Well, guess what, though? We
that?
have run out of time.
Okay. Well, thank you for this time.
Oh, yeah, you've been a fantastic guest, Tom, and I've enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah, me too.
We'll have to get you to come back again soon.
I welcome that.
Good. Well, folks, I've enjoyed the program with Tom tonight. I hope all of you have, too. And I hope that you found that it provided plenty of food for thought and more illumination for your personal journey towards truth. Join us again next week for a visit from Stephen Martin and another fascinating conversation on the Dawn of Shades. With that, we're out of time. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and good night.